In a commencement address last week at the University of Alabama, President Trump told journalism majors that he's not sure he likes the press, but acknowledged a free press is important.
We need a brilliant press. They're like a watchkeeper. They're very important, and you can go out and take it down a new track, help save the country. The people of this country, they know the truth when they hear it. That's why the ratings, the approval numbers of the media are so low.
Last week, the president ordered a cutoff to federal funding to two major public broadcasting systems, PBS and NPR. For more now, we're joined by CEOs Katherine Maher and Paula Kerger. Good to have you both together.
Great to be here.
So the president issued this order for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which oversees you both, to cut off funding. Are you both filing lawsuits, and on what basis can you challenge this?
We're looking at whatever options are available to us. I think it's a little preliminary for us to be able to speak to the specific strategies that we might take.
Is that the same for PBS?
Yeah, we're obviously looking, and I would just say that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is a funding mechanism, but they actually don't oversee PBS or NPR. We're independent organizations.
Important point to make. But the threat of cutting off funding, whether it was in Congress or the president saying he's doing it now, that's not new, right? That's been a talking point for years. There have been efforts in Congress. You do have funding, I think, through 2027, but it feels a little bit different this time. Do you have a backup funding plan?
Yeah, it is different this time, and I've been through these battles now for a number of years. I've been at PBS almost 20 years, and I remember even going back to the Newt Gingrich days. But this is different. They're coming after us on many different ways. We're waiting for a possible rescission of those funds that have already been appropriated.
A clawing back.
There was an effort within the FCC challenging our ability to accept sponsorships from corporations, which is something that we have worked with the FCC on for many, many years. There was the executive order. There was the effort to try to remove a few members of the CPB board. So we have never seen a circumstance like this. And obviously, we're going to be pushing back very hard, because what's at risk are our stations, our public television, our public radio stations across the country. We get 15% of our funding from the federal government. That's 15%, but that's an aggregate number. Some of our stations in small communities, it's 40 to 50% of their funding, and for them it's existential, and that's what's at risk if this funding goes away.
So is it immediate for NPR?
In a similar fashion, if we were to see a clawback of these funds, which we know is part of the conversation from a rescission standpoint, or if we were to see that stations were no longer able to participate in their membership dues, that would be damaging. But I think that Paula's point is the one that really people need to hear. The immediate damages to local stations. And with NPR, we have stations in more than 246 stations with newsrooms, more than 200 newsrooms in every state in the country, and that includes journalists who are out there covering their local communities, especially in a time where we're seeing an advance of news deserts across the nation. 20% of Americans don't have access to another local source of news. The impact of this could really be devastating, particularly in rural communities.
The president tweeted or socialed or truthed, Republicans must defund and totally disassociate themselves from NPR and PBS, the radical left monsters that so badly hurt our country. I have to tell you, I heard monsters and I thought of Cookie Monster. I thought of
did too,
Sesame
actually.
Street, and I thought of that children's programming.
Right.
That is in many ways what people think of when they think of PBS.
Absolutely.
Is that impacted too?
Absolutely. And out of this executive order, we believe it impacts our funding out of the Department of Education, which is a 30-year program that has supported the not only the creation of many of the children's programming that you see on public television, but also the research that we do to ensure that that programming is not just safe and enjoyable, but that children, after watching, come away with understanding of basic letters and numbers. Half the kids in this country are not enrolled in formal pre-K. That's why programming for children on public television was created. That was the idea with Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, and everything that's followed since is to make sure that children that do not have access to a full array of resources have the opportunity to learn and to develop skills that they'll need the first time they enter preschool. That may be at age 2 or 3 or 4 and sometimes 5, not until they start kindergarten. That's what's at risk.
At risk or right now? I mean, do you have the money to keep functioning?
Well, we have programming, so you're not going to turn on your TV set and not see our children's programming anymore. Okay. But if that funding is cut off, we have programs in development right now, and that will suddenly skid to a halt. We also have stations around the country that work directly with preschool providers and parents, and this funds those activities. So the immediate impact would be fairly significant.
So, Katherine, I want to ask you about the news. When we went and we read the executive order, the language in there says government funding of news media in this environment is outdated and unnecessary, corrosive to the appearance of independence. And Americans have the right to expect if their tax dollars fund public broadcasting that it's fair, accurate, unbiased, and nonpartisan. How do you respond to the implication that your news coverage is not?
Is not fair and nonpartisan.
And I think unbiased.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I think it's important to note that I'm the CEO and we have an independent editor-in-chief who oversees the newsroom. And so I don't make editorial decisions, and that I think is just always an important point to make. But I think our newsroom would really take issue with that. We have been on air for more than 50 years. We've been covering news as it occurs across the nation, in local communities, overseas. We have an extraordinary Washington desk, and our people report straight down the line. And I think that not only do they do that, they do so with a mission that very few other broadcast organizations have, which is a requirement to serve the entire public. That is the point of public broadcasting, is we bring people together in those conversations. And so we've had a whole host of conservative voices on air of late. We've been making requests of the Trump administration to have their officials on air. We would like to see more people accept those invitations. It's hard for us to be able to say we can speak for everyone when folks won't join us.
So that was the executive order. Then we went and we looked at the White House talking points and what they're putting on social media. They're a lot more about you than you. And on NPR, they were saying things like a July 2022 editor's note that said the Declaration of Independence had offensive language against Native Americans. We checked, and the word savages is used. The White House faults your editors for avoiding the term biological sex when discussing transgender issues. They apparently want you to use the term pro-life and faulted your use of the term anti-abortion rights to refer to activists. So when you see specific editorial criticisms like that, what do you interpret the intention of this being?
Well, I interpret the intention of this being trying to create a narrative around our editorial independence. And as I said in our...
To control it?
To control it. And I think that that is an affront to the First Amendment. We have an independent newsroom, and we will always have an independent newsroom. From my perspective, part of the separation of that the First Amendment offers is to keep government out. In fact, the statute that was written when the Public Broadcasting Act was signed into law was very explicit about interference from any member of the government, whether it is elected officials, whether members of independent agencies, because it is so sacrosanct, that division between the state and independent media.
That was the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967. Set it up as a private corporation to give protection from influence and control. I would assume that's also from the White House, influence and control.
That's right. And President Lyndon Johnson, who signed the bill into law, creating the Public Broadcasting Act and creating the system that we all operate within, was very he noted in his remarks upon signing that speech was that it does require a greater wisdom, and that's why we have a 2-year advance appropriation, is to insulate both of our work from political interference. I think that is critical, that Americans understand that public broadcasting is meant to be independent so that we can serve the public interest regardless of whatever administration is in office or whatever Congress's whims are.
And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was set up as a private corporation with that same intent. So I think there was a lot of focus, even at that moment, when the act was signed, that protections would need to be put in place. Because if we do our job, it is possible that we will produce content that some people may wish we have done a different way. And this way it gives us the independence. This way, the other thing that keeps us independent is that most of our funding comes from viewers like you. We ask people to make contribution to public broadcasting for something they get for free. because we are available free to every home in this country. And so both the combination of the fact that it was built as a public-private partnership, there would be some public money that went into public broadcasting that would enable stations in small communities to exist, alongside the fact that most of our support comes from people in communities. That really does create something that is very independent and very responsive to the communities that we serve.
And if I may, just to give a sense of those numbers, for every single dollar that the federal government puts in, stations raise on average about $7 from from private sources. And so you also have to recognize that this order interferes with the First Amendment rights of our listeners and viewers who've made a choice to contribute, and this is the news that they want to see and hear or the programming that they are committed to.
It did just stand out to us as journalists ourselves, because the research shows that, there's declining trust in media, in news, and the president was talking about that himself there, that he wants a free and fair press. We're going to continue to cover this, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having us.